on your well-being and your resilience, which is really, an important topic at any point in time. You all work so hard and you are such important integral parts of the school community. It's especially important now for us to be thinking about your well-being. So I'm really excited to be able to offer this opportunity. So I am going to a few times ask you questions and have you answer those in the chat. So those of you who are watching as a group, I think that's fantastic that you're watching in a group, and maybe you could just have one person move to the chat and kind of jump in with comments from various folks. Also, Dave is going to keep an eye on the chat for me. So if you think of a question as I'm talking, you can either write it down, and then when I pause a few times, you can jump in and ask, or you can write it in the chat and Dave will try to keep track of those for me. So I'm hoping that this will feel, even though we are still in the world of Zoom at this moment, I'm hoping this will feel interactive and engaging. I also am going to take a couple stretch breaks. So twice, I'm going to divide the time up, maybe about an hour from now, about 10:15, we'll take a short stretch break, and then we'll do another one around 11. So as always, meet your needs. If you need to get up and stretch or do yoga, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. But we will have those 2 stretch breaks coming. All right. So what I thought we would do this morning is think about, in my role as somebody who supports various school districts and people who work in schools for the past year and a half, obviously a large part of that has been focused on supporting all of you as you support the students, and thinking about how the impact of the pandemic is impacting all of us. And so there are about 5 concepts that keep rising to the top as helpful guides, as well as providing much needed hope. So I thought we would sort of focus on these 5 things throughout the morning and provide some strategies for you, as well as some insights in terms of how you can move through this year. So the goal is that we're trying to sort of shift the way that we think about our well-being as adults and helping professionals. And we're trying to not just go from like, how do you have a stressful job and then go home at the end of every day and engage in self-care, so that you, maybe take a walk, eat good food, play a game, hang out with friends, take a bubble bath, whatever that might be, and then you go back the next day. That's not actually going to cut it. That's all great. And that's a part of a bigger picture of you actually thriving in the context of stressful work, in the context of a stressful global time period. We want better than that for you, and you deserve better than that. And it is actually possible to thrive in the context of challenging work. Many of us who've chosen this work actually love, many of the more challenging aspects of this. And so we feed off and fuel off that, but there's times where it also can kind of steamroll us. So the idea here is to not wait for the pandemic to end, or the job to get easier, or more resources to come to feel better. The job is to start thriving now in the context of this hard stuff. We're going to figure out that. So in the past year and a half, in that spirit, I've noticed, as someone who focuses, sort of the focal point of my career is on resilience, and as that relates to trauma and autism spectrum disorder, mental health issues, and stress, I've noticed that we have actually, in a bigger community level, started to redefine understanding resilience in a way that I'm super excited about. I think we have a more accurate and more kind of deep understanding of the bigger community. 3 examples of that would be that, first of all, we've moved away from an over focus on resilience as being about individual capacities. And we're actually starting to understand that the resilience of an individual is the responsibility of the community within which that individual lives and works and operates. So the resilience of every student in your school community, actually the responsibility of the community. So shifting in that way is actually going to allow us to move away from an over focus on being basically this person either needs to figure it out or not. It allows us to think about how we have a responsibility and accountability for our community members to unconditionally hold everyone in and make sure everyone has access to support and resources. Another really exciting example of how our understanding of shifting is that it's just moving away from an over focus on self-care, and we're replacing that with this idea of community care. And community care is talked about in depth in the book Burnout, which is written by the Nagasaki sisters. If you are interested in reading more about that, it's a great book. They also have some, short talks and different things on YouTube that you can access. So what they talk about with community care is really important. It's this idea that in a community, there needs to be a balance between the people who are the leaders and the people who work in that community. And when there's a balance, everyone, leaders and staff, employees, have an opportunity to thrive. If things are out of balance, what that could look like is the leadership is taking more than their fair share of responsibility for the well-being of the people who work for them. And that's actually, that imbalance increases the burnout. So what happens in that way is that you're around trying to and functioning better. And that actually is a recipe for disaster. However, if it tips in the other direction where the leadership is saying, you're an adult, you work here, suck it up, buttercup, go home, take a bubble bath and feel better, then that actually is also a recipe for burnout, because we're not taking that shared responsibility. So in community care, as a staff person in a community, you feel like people are noticing how the work is impacting you in good ways and in hard ways. People are asking questions and listening, and there's a fluid norm changing and policy shifting to account for what are the needs of the adults who work in that community. We're paying attention to our norms, and we're shifting them if they're not working. An example of that would be a community where the rule is that people do not have to respond to emails outside of working hours. But the norm is that everybody is actually checking email and responding to email all evening and all weekend. So that norm is actually going to contribute to burnout. And so that's the kind of thing in community care where we would be talking about that as a group, and we would be recognizing what is the norm that we want to set, and then how do we shift our behavior to match the norm. That if the norm doesn't match the rule, we should either change the rule or change the norm, because when norms don't match rules, we start having tension and a breakdown and morale drops. So in that kind of shared model, the people who work in that community also feel that they have agency, they have power, and they have the ability to act on their own behalf and take responsibility for setting limits, keeping boundaries, and taking care of themselves within the work environment, and that is consistent with the norms. So that's what we're trying to shift to and work toward, and recognize that people engaging in self-care outside of work is important and great, but not the answer to this, to this situation. The last thing is that I think that we have moved on from a myth that resilience was about going through an adverse experience and coming out of it unscathed, totally fine. I was tough, that didn't impact me, I'm totally fine. That actually isn't what resilience is. Resilience is moving through adversity, feeling the feelings that are evoked from it, being able to put words to those emotions, connect with other people in the context of that and sit with it, having social support where we have people who don't feel like they need to jump and fix our problems when we express distress, that they can just sit with us in that emotion and validate it. And we learn coping skills. As we move through adversity, we gain new skills, so that after a time of adversity, you have scars, you have impact, and strengthened connection, strengthened resolve, and new coping skills. What ends up happening then is that you are, in fact, more interesting, you are more complex, you are more compassionate, and you have lived experience that helps you the next time you face an adverse time. Your lived experience is that this is hard, I can do this, and things will get better. So every time you go through adversity, you have the potential for what we call post-traumatic resilience, which is that you actually can come out of a time of adversity stronger than you were before, stronger than your baseline. So we don't wish for adversity. I certainly, with every fiber of my being, wish this pandemic had never happened, but good things are and will going to come from it. And that, honestly, at this point, 18 months in, we should be more focused at this point as helping professionals on the lasting good that has the potential to come from this, so that we can reinforce and maximize that. So some of the questions that I've focused my work on in the past 18 months is, what would it look like to promote the well-being of our community beyond simply encouraging self-care? What would that actually look like? So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. How do we shift our stance during experiences so that we can actually prevent distress, rather than just assume that every day I'm going to go to work and I'm going to absorb a whole bunch of stuff And then I'm gonna have to go home and figure out how to process all of it and undo it so that I'm ready to do that the next day. So what we actually want to do is have some self-protective buffering while we're moving through the day, so that when we drive home, we're still in reasonable condition. We also have to think about how we're understanding stress and that others allow us to move through experiences in wise and resilient ways. So part of this is just going back to the basics and reminding us, what do we know about stress? How can we recognize it as it's happening? And how can we teach others? Every single person in this meeting has the opportunity to teach other people about stress in a way that's going to promote their resilience. So I just wanted to give you sort of a funny example as we start of how this has gone for the past year and a half. So I've had the opportunity to talk about this topic many times. Most of my professional development in the past year was really focused on the well-being of the adults, which is great. And I did a talk like this in a faculty meeting in December at Westford School in Westford, Vermont. And it was great. We had a great meeting. And about 2 weeks after I did that, I got a package in the mail from Westford School. And they said, "Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We created an artistic representation of our main takeaway from your presentation." And I was like, uh-oh. So here's what they sent me. So basically, this is what it all comes down to. At first I saw that and I was like, okay, hold on a sec. I don't actually swear at work. So I don't think I said that. I don't think that's a direct quote, but that was sort of the summary of what they took away from it. And it actually does kind of capture the whole message, which is that we can't take on all this stuff and then expect to go home and simply take a bubble bath and be back to our baseline. It's going to be more complicated than that. Okay, so thank you, Westford School. All right, so let's jump in. So I wanted to remind us of the main two kind of foundational concepts that we think about when we think about influencing trauma response, because they're very relevant to what we're going to try to do in terms of shifting our own resilience. So one of the things that we talk about over and over and over again, and it's important to keep reminding ourselves of it, because as we approach the day, we want these concepts to be very much in the front of our minds so that we can recognize things as they're happening. So foundational point is that trauma response is not in fact determined by a traumatic or stressful event. It's much more about the associations that we form while we're experiencing the event and the meaning that we make of the event. Those are the two components that influence our response, which is right out of the gate here, really good news. We have almost no control over traumatic events, whether or not they happened, and we can't go back and change them. We have huge influence over associations and meaning making. So we actually have a lot more ability to shift the part that really matters. So let's take the associations part first and just take a look at that. Very quick kind of basic reminder is that associations that we form in the context of a traumatic experience are nicknamed triggers. So you have heard that. It's currently something that teenagers love to say, triggers, I'm triggered by that. And they say they're triggered when they simply don't want to do something and they're not actually triggered. So I actually love to talk to teenagers about what is it, this thing that you're saying, what does it really mean neurologically? And they're fascinated by that. So an association or a trigger is basically you have a powerful experience. During that powerful experience, it evokes in you some kind of emotion. And that emotion is something that you use in the future when that same cue is presented. The emotion that you experienced the last time you came across that cue comes to the surface, and that gives you information very quickly on a very gut instinct level, whether this is going to go well or not, and whether you should fight, flee, or stay engaged. And what our brain does is basically it takes a sensory snapshot when you're experiencing something that is threatening to you or someone that you love. What you're either watching something or you're experiencing something that feels like your brain memorizes on every sensory level, the smells, the sights, the feels, the internal feeling, the external feeling, and everything that kind of what all the cues. And you have this like photographic memory almost of all of this, so that the next time any one of those cues presents, you will remember the last time I felt this or experienced this internally or externally, I was then threatened. And so therefore I need to protect myself right now. And that could be fight, flee, flop, any of those options. So the really good thing about this is that it is to promote our survival. And so if something happens, like you are swimming at the beach And then there's like a big alarm and it turns out there's a shark in the water and you run out of the water and you're terrified. And the next time someone says, hey, do you want to go swimming dressed in wetsuits, so we'll kind of look like seals and splash around in the water off Cape Cod, you'd be like, yeah, no, thank you. Actually, I don't really want to do that. That sounds terrifying. And so basically that is great because you can live a full and beautiful life without ever swimming, in the deep water off Cape Cod. So an association like that is life promoting and it's a good thing, no problem. Where it becomes inconvenient is when your brain connects various aspects of a situation that in fact had nothing to do with the fact that you were threatened to the threat. So that's where a lot of the students that you work with have very confusing and unexpected reactions to things. So for example, a student might have a traumatic experience that involves a lot of elements. And one of the random elements is that a person who was involved in that happened to be a man with a beard. So the brain of that child is going to memorize everything, including the beards, as an association of threat. Now that's completely unhelpful and actually detrimental to that child because whether or not a man has a beard has nothing to do with whether or not they're safe or not. And it's what we would call a maladaptive and inaccurate trigger, cue, or association intended to help, but in fact going to get in our way. So what we want to do is we understand this basic idea is that when we notice that we or someone that we're interacting with or working with is having an unexpected or surprising reaction to something, it's very likely connected to a trigger or an association that might have made sense at a certain time or place, but is not actually accurate or helpful now. And that basic experience of this student is having an unexpected, undesired reaction that seems surprising and unnecessary is often storied as a behavioral choice when it's actually a gut level reaction based on prior experience. So we all know that, and that's a lot of the work that you all do. So what does this have to do with your well-being? Well, before I jump into that, I want to give us a visual so that we can kind of remember what this looks like as it's happening. So this is my favorite example of this because it's sweet and pleasant and not upsetting to watch, but it is actually kind of in a nutshell everything that we need to know about triggers. So this is Buddy. Buddy, from what I can tell reading about him on the internet, has a great life. But on this particular day, Buddy did something he's done thousands of times and it didn't go well. He simply was running to come in his house, which he's done a ton of times, no problem. He has no association between going through the door and really anything because it's always been fine or neutral, no big deal. On this day, he was running full speed ahead to come inside. He didn't notice that the glass door was shut and he slammed his head into the glass and it really hurt really bad. So now he has what we would call loose association between going through the door being somehow painful or threatening, and his gut is telling him, as his human is simply saying, come in the house, it's okay. His gut is saying, no way, last time you did this, it hurt really bad, don't do it. So you watch the little dance they do and we'll see what happens.
Buddy, come on. Come on. Come here, buddy. Come on. Come on. Come on. You can come through. See, watch. Watch. See, watch, buddy. See? See? Come on. Come on. You can do this. Come on. Buddy, come. Come here. Buddy, come. Come here, buddy. Come on. Come here. You gonna come? Come here. Come here, buddy. No, that's me, buddy. Come on. Come on. You gonna come? Come on. What if I got you a biscuit? I got you a treat. What if I got you a treat? A bacon strip? Come on. It's okay. Oh my gosh. You were in the house.
Buddy's in the house. All right.
Good boy.
So basically, when we watch Buddy, in that little video, you see what you all do with your students all the time and what you train other people to do with your students, which is basically when you have somebody who is shutting down, resistant, not able to move through a sequence or a routine that you think is no big deal. Let's walk in the school building. Let's sit down and try some math. let's go out on the playground and ask someone to play with us. Let's sit and eat lunch in the cafeteria. You're asking kids to do the basic routines of school. They're shutting down on you and refusing, escalating, resisting, avoiding. And in that dance, what she just did with Buddy is exactly what you brilliantly do all the time, which is that you, first of all, she obviously has a good relationship with Buddy. So you focus on relationship first. You build those relationships with your students, because if she didn't have a good relationship with Buddy, she would be sunk. No chance of getting him to do anything. So relationship first. Then she kept her emotional stance consistent with the situation. She did not let her emotions get swept up in his behavior. So she didn't get demanding. She stayed calm. Go through the door. No big deal, buddy. Come on, let's just go through the door. And then the third thing she did is she remembered that when people are in a stressed or triggered state, they often can't process directions. So what she's asking him to do is very simple, but he didn't seem to understand maybe, so she showed him. She went through the door herself and she modeled for him. And then the last thing that she did was that she recognized that sometimes it's not enough to have relationship and co-regulation and modeling. You also need reinforcement. So then, of course, she offered him bacon. So you obviously should offer your students bacon if they want aren't doing what you want them to do. So she had that reinforcement, and that was the recipe that actually got him to override his gut and come through the door. Now, this is a loose association. So all he's going to have to do is go through the door a few times, and it's going to release. And the idea that going through the door is either no big deal or positive, because it means you're home, is going to be back reinstated for him. So she won't have to give him bacon, more than a few times to get this to let go. The trick that we have, and one of the things that I think contributes to our exhaustion and our feeling defeated and our feeling discouraged, which can contribute to our burnout or compassion fatigue, is that we do this dance over and over and over again, and it's hard to see whether or not things are shifting. And that's because a lot of the associations or triggers that our students are responding to are not loose, like Buddy going through the door. They're very tightly entrenched, because they were based on a threat to their life or the well-being of someone else, and they were repeatedly experienced. So that takes a lot of repetitions. So first of all, part of what protects us from burnout is what we are expecting of ourselves, what we are expecting of our students, and what we are expecting of the other adults that we work with. And remembering that associations take many, many, many repetitions of the cue being presented and things actually being neutral, positive, or good, for them to release and then be replaced with something new. So a lot of where we get in trouble is that we just get frustrated and we feel like, I must not be good at this because this isn't changing yet, when actually we're doing exactly the right thing. We just haven't done it enough times. So going into this school year, remembering that is first of all going to be self-protective. Second of all, we want to remember that as we're interacting with people, we are going to be having triggers and associations, because we have now all gone through an adverse experience as well. And the people that we're interacting with will also. So a lot of what seems confusing or surprising is simply about the associations that everyone has formed. And very inconveniently, a group of people are all going to have very different associations to different things. So the second thing that helps is that when things are confusing or surprising, this information is going to help you not take it personally. When people have unexpected, undesired reactions, it is not about you. It is not about how they feel about you. It is not about your relationship with them. And it is not about how competent you are. Even if you are the one that triggers them, for example, let's say your tone of voice triggers a student, it is still not about you. It is about a prior experience that they had that your behavior reminded them of. And actually, you staying in their life, exposing them to that particular cue or trigger, and being kind and supportive and safe is the best way for them to shift that association, and you will promote their resilience. So first and foremost, don't take it personal. What does that really mean? That's part of what that really means. For the past 18 months, we all have repeatedly experienced a dynamic where we changed the routine of school because there was a threat to safety. In a bigger context where we were all more stressed and feeling anxious about personal safety. That is the exact recipe to build an association or a trigger. If you ask me, how do you build triggers? I would say freak everybody out and then repeatedly change the basic routine of their life and then tell them that it's because things aren't safe. And then really make sure they follow the new routine by reminding them how unsafe things are. That's exactly what we did. So now we have a ton of people who have associations, including each and every one of us. So what's going to happen as we move into the school year, and it's going to be fine, because what's going to happen is actually the answer to the problem, but we are going to feel more distress before we feel more comfortable. So we want to be prepared for that. And as that's happening, just let everybody know it's totally okay. This is just the transitional phase. This is to be expected. Things are going to change. Like, let's say you have to wear a mask, but now everybody can go to a faculty meeting with 50 people in the library. Or let's say that you have to wear masks, but all the kids can be in the cafeteria again. Or let's say that you have to wear masks, but everybody's transitioning at the same time and the hallway feels really crowded again. You feel anxious because you haven't experienced something like that for a while. And when things changed at school for the last many months, it was because things were less safe. Now they're changing because they're safer. But your gut is going to have the same reaction. Things changed. That means we're not safe. So your gut is going to be telling you, get out of here. And your brain is going to be saying, no, actually, this new plan makes sense to me. I just don't feel comfortable with it yet. So understanding that going in is going to be buffering, and it's also going to help us kind of be really patient with the people around us and understand what's happening. So what we know is that the best way to shift associations to be adaptive is that it includes increasing awareness. First, tell people what you're experiencing makes total sense. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, your brain and body are working exactly as they should to help you survive, protect you. And this makes total sense. And so then you practice your self-calming. We have all of these techniques: deep breathing, meditation, mindfulness, taking walks, sensory paths, fidgets, calming corners, on and on and on. We have all these strategies to calm ourselves down. So we are aware of what's happening. We use the calming techniques, and then we just repeatedly, in a more routine, predictable way, expose ourselves to the cue. Let's say that you're freaked out to go to meetings in a room with 12 people, and that's something that's part of your job several times a week now. And the first time you go, you're like, I can't even pay attention to this meeting because I'm so freaked out. So you just tell yourself, nothing wrong with me. This makes total sense. What are my calming techniques? And that the good thing is these meetings are well within my control. They're scheduled. I know when they're happening. And each time I go with my coping skills, I will feel a little bit more comfortable. And eventually my brain is going to let this go, because it was adaptive to my survival a year ago to not hang out in a room of unfamiliar people for an hour. Now it is deemed safe to do that. So that association is no longer adaptive or accurate, and repeated exposure is going to help me let it go. This whole piece is super important for kids, parents, and staff who work in schools to understand, because it's going to prevent us from pathologizing a typical process or experience of moving through this pandemic. We do not want by October 500 new 504 plans and half of the faculty saying that they can't be in the school because they can no longer handle it. It's too uncomfortable. We want to normalize the typical response, reassure people that we're going to have to get more distressed in order to feel calmer. This is perfectly expected, and with repeated exposure, we will all be okay. All right, so I wanted to invite you in the chat to answer a question. And after we do this, I'll pause and see if there are any questions or connections that people have. So I'm asking in the chat, could you think of what is an example of an association that you've formed in the last year and a half that you are guessing might end up not being helpful or accurate to you in the future? So I'll give you an example. For me, I went to a conference a couple weeks ago, and as I was walking around greeting a bunch of people I hadn't seen in a long time, everyone was shaking hands. And when someone would stick their hand out to shake my hand, my reaction was, what the heck is wrong with you, right? And then I just wanted hand sanitizer. I was so distracted by trying to find the hand sanitizer every time I shook someone's hand. Fascinatingly, when someone gave me a hug, I had only a pleasant response to that. This is the fascinating thing about our brain. I was comfortable hugging people, but not shaking people's hands. I can't really explain that, but clearly those are the associations that have been formed in my brain as like dangerous, safe. And so basically, you just recognize, here it is, it's playing out right now. And then I was able to make sense of it as it was happening in a way that made me feel more comfortable. So if you could jump in the chat and write an association that you think you might have. Yep, Sarah's saying not being startled when people cough. Yep. Yep, eating near others, sharing food. Yeah, Heather, I just watched something this morning where two people who worked together, one person took a sip of a cocktail and then handed it to the other person to take a sip. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with those people? It's fascinating now, things that we pick up that we wouldn't have even noticed before. Yep, going out, going to stores. Yep. Yep. Walking around without a mask, you feel naked now, whereas a year ago you felt super uncomfortable with the mask. You were trying to get used to it. Now we have to get used to not having it. Being in crowds, grocery shopping, standing in the line, sharing phones. Yep. Yep. Any sick symptom. These are really great examples. Yep. So a lot of the things that you're listing are really powerful examples, because these are things that are part of your everyday life that I imagine having, like going into the office to work, going to a social gathering. Those are important parts of life that we now have a startling unsafe gut response to. And so it'll be really important to not decide, like, I guess I just can't do that anymore. Like, again, it really is part of giving people power back after they've experienced some kind of acute stress or adversity, is to say that the trauma is not in control, you are. So now that we've recognized that you have this association, up to you. Do you want to keep it or change it? So if I now can't swim in the ocean and enjoy that because I have an association that I might get eaten by a shark, which I actually do now. And it's not because of something that happened other than I watched a lot of Shark Week earlier this summer. I really love Shark Week. And now I can't, I told my husband when we go to Maine, I can't kayak with him anymore. He's really annoyed by that, which I said sounds like a you problem. I'm not changing that, right? Like, I just don't want to do that anymore. And I can live a full life, right? Without kayaking in the ocean. But there's other associations like politely greeting someone with a handshake. I want to get that back. So that's how you take your power back, is you say, I don't want that actually to be uncomfortable for me. Maybe like Jameson is saying large crowds, maybe Jameson loves concerts. I don't know. So take it back is the thing. It's like, don't let the adversity be in control. Take the control back. And we know the recipe. So it's increased awareness, practice coping skills, and then repeated exposure to the cue in a gradual way. So you wouldn't maybe start with like a 2,000, 10,000 people conference or concert, right? You would like gradually work your way to being comfortable in increasingly large groups of people. Again, through repeated exposure, you can regain that comfort. Yes, Josh, thank you for the shark detector. Yep. I know. Somebody else told me that you can get an app on your phone. I think I'm definitely going to get that. I do spend a lot of time in Maine, and I think either way, I feel like what I said to my husband is, there's definitely a great white in the same body of water as me, so therefore I'm out, even though it's the ocean, right? Okay. So do people have questions or comments or connections at this point? Let me just pause and ask. You can either write it in the chat or you can unmute and ask.
If you want to unmute, maybe just hit your raise hand under the reactions. It might be easier for us to see you.
Okay.
We don't all talk over each other.
I'm not seeing any questions or hearing anyone. So just because we're in the world, here, there's a great question. Right now I have to put my glasses on to read it. Yep, that's a great example, Greg. Yep. Yeah, great. Sarah's saying it's really important to not pathologize it. I think that you actually, in your roles, are going to have to be co-regulators in your school systems for parents and colleagues, and just say that when we're questioning things like, does this child now have a social anxiety disorder? Does this child have PTSD? Does this child have, whatever, we're going to list all of these mental health disorders. I think what we need to say is like, let's just slow down, right? Let's pump the brakes. An expected reaction to this kind of situation is going to potentially look pretty big. And so we're going to have to just wait, support people, and keep people together and on routine, and let things settle in. We shouldn't be diagnosing anybody for symptoms that are new in the last year and a half, I don't think, for a couple months. I think we should be just slowing down and letting things play out. And I think you all can be voices of reason in that. Yeah, routine is vital. Absolutely. Yep. One of the other mistakes we could make is, of course, the thing that we do where we just keep sending kids out of class, right? Then they're off routine now. So we need to keep people on routine and together. And we're going to talk about that actually a little bit more. Okay, so because we're in the world of Zoom, I'm wondering if people, can you just give me like a thumbs up if you're with me and this is making sense? Great, I'm getting actual thumbs ups and Zoom thumbs ups. Perfect, thank you so much. When we said for well-being. So for both the adults, each and every one of you, and your colleagues and your students, what we could expect moving into this school year is impact on 4 levels. So we just want to think about 4 levels, which is, I think, going to make it less overwhelming and help us kind of categorize things as they come up. So sensory, emotional, and cognitive regulation are the first 3 of the 4 areas that we could expect impact. So basically the kinds of things that I'm anticipating and have already seen is that adults are going to you might feel overwhelmed by sensory input that would have been very typical 2 years ago. So noise, what is typical noise, classroom hallway noise, might feel to you shockingly loud. Some of us have pretty noisy and chaotic lives at home. So a very quiet you know, a noise level at school could also be disconcerting. So a shift in the noise input, crowds, movement, lights, smells, sitting. I always have an adjustment phase in September to wearing pants that button and shoes, because in the summer I'm barefoot or I have sneakers, and I usually wear pretty much one pair of shorts all summer. That's a little secret that I'll be honest with you about, and they're usually super comfortable. So all of a sudden I'm like in work clothes again, and they feel incredibly uncomfortable, even though they actually fit, you know, and they would have been comfortable to me before. And so that's going to be sort of the same kinds of typical September discomforts on steroids for all of us, adults and kids. So we just want to recognize, like, this makes sense, and we want to remember that our brain will recalibrate. Our brain will recalibrate with exposure to that sensory input. We will tolerate discomfort, and then we will be comfortable again. You can either decide to rapid do that and sort of flood yourself by saying, like, I'm just going to suck it up and hang out and I'll feel more comfortable soon. Or you can have, I would prefer that you have coping skills and strategies to think about how you might expose yourself to that input in a gradually increasing way or with breaks. So for example, if it feels really noisy in a room, perhaps you and the classroom teacher, the other adults, could decide to do like a quiet minute where you ring a chime, you wait 60 seconds, you ring it again, and then people go back to talking. And what you could say is something like, it's actually not noisy in here. It feels so loud because we haven't all been together like this in a while. So we're just going to take a quiet minute to give our brains a break, and then we'll restart, go back. You're not doing anything wrong. That prevents us from going to the, like, you're being too loud, quiet down, it's too noisy in here, which is actually not great modeling, because that's not what's happening. Emotional regulation would be, you might notice that you are having just a greater range of emotional lability, we call it. So basically, let's say you're laughing with a friend and you haven't like hung out and socialized with coworkers in so long that you're like laughing and all of a sudden you like can't stop laughing, or you're frustrated because somebody took a sip out of your water bottle by accident, but now you're feeling like you have to burn the water bottle and you're furious with them because you want hydration, right? So it's like, you little small emotions are going to go big really fast. And that's another thing to just notice in ourselves and others as like, oh, typical expected adjustment. This will settle back in as we kind of stay in the situation. Call it what it is. Don't pathologize it. Take a breath and show each other grace. People are going to have big reactions to things that you do that aren't going to make any sense to you. Again, we're not going to take it personal. It's just part of this whole adjustment phase. Cognitive regulation, you and everybody else are likely to have less stamina, shorter endurance for focused work. Problem-solving abilities are going to be limited. For example, multitasking will be really hard if you're sensory overloaded. So one thing at a time is going to be more important than ever. When you're driving in the car, if you're overwhelmed from the input that you just had at work, do yourself a favor, turn the radio off, and just drive and focus on one thing at a time. You will have less focus, you'll be more distracted, and your sustained attention will be less. We'll be more patient with ourselves, we'll be more patient with each other, and we'll call it what it is. It's part of this integration adjustment phase. We're not going to pathologize it, and we're not going to freak out that something's wrong with us. We can't do this work. We have to quit and become alpaca farmers or something. There's nothing wrong with alpaca farming, but if what you really want to do is work with people, don't give up in like September 5th. Right? This is all going to kind of settle back in. The other area of very expected impact is in our social behavior. So sensory, emotional, cognitive, social. Those are the 4 areas that we're going to keep categorizing. This makes sense. This is totally expected. The kinds of things that we might see would be awkward moments, communication glitches. In my consultation role, I have to say, one of the things that was deeply sad to me last spring was several school teams that kind of just fell apart relationally in a way that was out of character. And it was clearly, in my opinion, related to the stress of the situation and not those individuals. And I just think it's important that we go into this year expecting that we may have unexpected conflicts or miscommunications with colleagues, and we need to show grace to ourselves and others and repair that, and call it what it is, which is about the context that we're in, not who we are as people. I think a bit more of that is going to happen, and it broke my heart. I think we have some repair to do. So if that happened in your school, or even with the team that you're part of, please know that you're not alone. That happened in most of the school districts I work in. We might also feel socially satiated very quickly. I know earlier in the summer when I was starting to go to gatherings again, I was like ready to go back home after about 15 minutes. And, that was like an awkward time to leave a barbecue, right? Like you show up and say hi to people and then leave. Like that's not actually how a barbecue works. So, I think our stamina for social time is going to have to gradually grow too. So what will help is slow down, create space, gradually rebuild stamina, and provide yourself with the same kind of scaffolding and support that you are so good offering to your students. And I really liked this image that I found the other day, which it says almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So what's important here is that as adults and as you're working with your teams in school, one of the things that we should do more of is just stepping in and covering each other for brief periods of time. People who work in schools are constantly sort of prolonging their own well-being. They just put off their own well-being. I have 4 minutes before my next thing, but I'm going to check my email or send a text or make a phone call instead of getting water, going to the bathroom, moving your body, getting some fresh air, just stopping for a minute, stop input, and allow yourself that opportunity to kind of regulate. Our brains and bodies work remarkably well. If we simply stop input for a matter of 3-ish minutes, your brain and body will settle a lot of stuff down and let a lot of stuff go that wasn't yours to hold. And your basic needs will rise to the surface and you will realize, oh, I have to go to the bathroom or I'm really thirsty. And then you can meet that need. You don't have to actually do anything. The whole point is to do nothing for a short period of time. My wish for people who work in schools is that you could get that pause somewhere other than a bathroom stall. I wish for a more pleasant smell for your pause and a more like fresh like environment for you when you do that. So spell each other out, create a norm for that. That's going to be really important. And then remember that when you get home from work and you are sort of processing everything that you absorbed during the day, there's 2 ways that you could seek regulation. One is through mindfulness, which I'm sure many of you have probably more expertise than I do in. And mindfulness is simply paying attention on purpose to the present moment, non-judgmentally. So you're basically just saying, how am I doing? And the answer is not great, hot mess. Okay, what is it that I'm feeling? Put words to that, acknowledge it, be graceful with yourself, and figure out what you might be able to do that would help you return to regulation. Do you need to do something that helps you feel joy? Do you need to do something that helps you feel curious? Do you need to do something that helps you feel competent? Do you need to just rest, zone out? In that moment of mindfulness, when you recognize how you're feeling, one of the tricks is to not resist the survival instincts that are rising up in you. So if you get home and you're sitting on your couch and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that day. So let me just pause for a minute and see how I'm feeling. Okay, how I'm feeling is I'd like to run away to Canada, which is really inconvenient right now because it's hard to get into Canada. I have to get a COVID test, shoot. Where could I run away to, right? So the thing is, that is your body telling you that you want to flee. It's a flight instinct because you feel so overwhelmed. Don't resist it. Go with it a little bit. Please don't run away to Canada, right? But just take a walk, take a rigorous short walk, right? So what is it that my body is striving toward, and how can I meet that need in a small way? Let's say that you feel like you want to freeze, you want to take a nap for the next 3 weeks. Okay, probably don't do that, but maybe a power nap, 5 or 10 minutes. There's a ton of research on the rejuvenating impact of a power nap. So you want to fight rigorous exercise, or maybe go tear up a garden. I don't know, like figure out what is the instinct that's welling up in me. And if you move through it by an activity that resembles what your body is craving, you will actually release that and neurochemically more quickly rebalance. So it's a really fascinating thing about our culture is that somehow, especially women, are taught to stifle our impulses rather than move with or through them and give ourselves some version of what it is that we're craving. Another powerful strategy is that you might need mindlessness. And there's an article linked at the bottom of this slide that talks about mindlessness, which I think is fascinating. So basically the idea is that you could be mindful, where you really turn inward and lean into how you're doing, or you actually give yourself what we call cognitive distraction, where you do something that's mindless. That simply means doing something that for you gets your mind off or distracted from what is swirling within, and focused on something that you feel good at, that you enjoy, that you're fascinated by, etc. So it could be dancing, drawing, hiking, singing, cooking, anything that absorbs you in a fun, spontaneous, playful way. When you're totally stressed out, you should actually learn a new skill. Seems totally counterintuitive, but it moves your brain into a different place of curiosity. Curiosity is the antidote to fear. So a lot of people who fared better during the first initial stage of COVID learned a new talent. And the reason that that actually helped them is because it distracted them and moved their brain into a curious place. So it is actually a good idea for all the students to go back to school. It is actually a good idea for them to be engaged in challenging learning opportunities, because it will move their brain to that curious place and benefit them in the long run. But it's going to be hard to get them to make that shift and to focus on that. But it is actually the right thing to do. Okay. And there's another article here if you want to read more about mindfulness as it links to working with students with trauma. All right, so this is a great time for us. Let's do to 10:25. So I'm going to restart at 10:25. So take a stretch break, pause, do what you want to do. If you keep the Zoom open, that's the easiest way for everything to go smoothly, is if you keep the Zoom open, maybe just turn your camera off, whatever. If you have to go and come back, you know, I'm a little bit worried because our Zoom is limited at 100 people. So it would be great if you could just keep the Zoom open, but step away for 10 minutes and come back. So I'll see you all at 10:25.